The silence in the penthouse office was a living thing, thick with the scent of old leather, lemon polish, and the crisp, green perfume of $50 million. It was a scent Thomas Mitchell knew better than his own. It was the smell of victory, of sleepless nights, of brutal negotiations and broken rivals. Tonight, however, it smelled of poison. From his throne-like leather armchair in the corner, shrouded in the deep shadows thrown by the lone desk lamp, he watched. His breathing was a slow, metronomic rhythm, a carefully constructed illusion of sleep. His eyes, however, were open, mere slivers of cold, blue steel peering through heavy lids, observing the stage he had so meticulously set. The stage was his own office, a sprawling expanse of glass and mahogany on the 80th floor that overlooked the glittering, indifferent heart of the city. But the centerpiece, the star of tonight's grim little play, was the vault, a behemoth of chrome and steel. Its door stood yawningly, unnaturally open, and inside, illuminated by a directed beam from the ceiling, lay the bait. Stacks upon stacks of $100 bills, bundled and bricked, a king's ransom left exposed. With calculated carelessness, it was more money than most people dreamed of, a tangible representation of a lifetime's labor for 1,000 ordinary men, and it was all a lie, a test, a desperate, final appeal to a world he no longer believed in. Thomas Mitchell, at 45, was a monument to success, carved from ambition and iced with cynicism. He had built Mitchell Enterprises from a garage startup into a global technology empire. He had navigated the treacherous waters of Wall Street, outsmarted corporate raiders, and bent markets to his will. But a single act of treachery had undone him in a way no financial loss ever could. $3 million. That was the price of his trust, embezzled by Marcus Thorne, his partner of 20 years, a man he had considered a brother. The discovery hadn't just broken his company's finances, it had fractured his faith in humanity itself. The world, he had concluded, was populated by takers. Everyone had a price. Now he was possessed by a morbid curiosity to find out what that price was. The test had been running for a week. The night security guard, a man with a sick wife and mounting medical bills, had merely glanced at the open safe, shaken his head, and locked the office door behind him, his footsteps hastening down the hall as if fleeing a ghost. The junior executive who came in on a weekend to catch up on work saw the money, paled, and backed out of the room, sending Thomas an anonymous, panicked email about a security breach from a burner account. They had passed, but their reactions were born of fear, not integrity. They were afraid of the consequences of being caught. Thomas was looking for something purer. He was looking for someone who would do the right thing when they were certain no one was watching. And then, he heard it. The soft squeak of the heavy office door, followed by the gentle rhythmic swish of a cleaning cart. Diana Jefferson and her daughter, Jasmine, they had been the silent nocturnal custodians of his corporate palace for 2 years, ghosts who left the world gleaming in their wake. Diana was a quiet, dignified woman with eyes that held a story of quiet struggle. Thomas knew little about her, only what HR records told him. Single mother, perfect attendance, no complaints. She was just another cog in his vast machine. Until now, tonight, she was his final subject. Okay, sweet pea. Diana's voice was a soft melody in the cavernous room. You can set up your coloring book at the small table while Mummy gets to work. Remember the rules. No touching Mr. Thomas's things, a tiny voice chirped in response. And use my inside voice. Diana's hand rested on the little girl's shoulder as she entered the room. Jasmine was a miniature version of her mother, with the same serious eyes but with a spark of unquenchable childhood curiosity. She was only 6 years old, a tiny satellite orbiting her mother's world. Tonight, she wore a pair of miniature, pink cleaning gloves, a thoughtful gift from Diana that made her feel like a part of the team during her school holidays. Thomas's feigned sleep deepened. He watched as Diana began her routine with practiced efficiency, her focus absolute. She wiped down the vast mahogany desk, polished the glass walls that overlooked the city, and dusted the bookshelves filled with leather-bound first editions. She moved with a grace that was almost reverent, treating the symbols of his wealth with a respect he himself had long since lost. She never once glanced toward the corner where he sat, nor toward the glittering temptation of the open safe. But the child was different. Jasmine, her coloring book forgotten, was drawn to the strange metal cave in the wall. Children are magpies, attracted to all that glitters, and the fortune in the safe was the most glittering thing she had ever seen. She took a tentative step, then another, her small feet silent on the plush Persian rug, her little head tilted, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. She moved closer, her tiny frame silhouetted out against the brilliant green of the cash dot. This was the moment. Thomas's heart, a dormant, stony thing, began to hammer against his ribs. He held his breath, every muscle in his body tensing. He had seen the darkest corners of human greed. He had witnessed men in $1,000 suits lie, cheat, and steal, for a fraction of what this child was now staring at. A bitter, preemptive disappointment washed over him. He was about to see innocence corrupted. He was about to have his bleak worldview confirmed by a 6-year-old girl. He braced himself for the inevitable, the furtive snatching of a single bill, a small hand stuffing a bundle of cash into a pocket, a secret that would fester between mother and child. Jasmine reached the safe. She stood on her tiptoes, her fingers gripping the cold steel of the door as she peered inside. Her eyes, which had only ever seen the carefully counted coins and folded single-dollar bills in her mother's worn purse, widened at the sheer volume of the money. It wasn't just a lot of money. It was an impossible amount, a mountain range of presidents and founders. Thomas waited for the fall. He watched her small hand lift, her fingers unfurling, but the hand didn't grasp, it didn't snatch, but instead, with the focused solemnity only a child can muster, Jasmine reached in and picked up a single, loose $100 bill from a messy pile. Thomas's jaw clenched. There it is. But she didn't pocket it. She carefully straightened its creases, her little brow furrowed in concentration. Then she placed it neatly on top of a perfectly aligned stack. She picked up another, and another, and another. Her little pink-gloved hands began to work with an almost comical precision. She separated the bills by denomination, a task made easy since they were almost all hundreds, and began to organize the chaotic piles into neat, crisp stacks. She was tidying, she was organizing a fortune with the same earnest care she might apply to her crayons. She was not a thief. She was a tiny, unwitting accountant. A small whisper broke the silence, so soft it was almost a thought. "Mummy," Jasmine murmured, her voice filled with the innocent pride of a child who has spotted and corrected an adult's mistake. "Mr. Thomas's money was all messy. I tidied it up, just like you taught me to do with our coins at home." The rhythmic sound of Diana's polishing cloth stopped. She turned, her body stiffening in alarm as she saw where her daughter was. A gasp escaped her lips, sharp and fearful in the quiet office. "Jasmine, honey, no, get away from there. You can't touch the boss's things." She rushed over, her face a mask of panic. She knelt beside her daughter, her voice a frantic whisper. "Sweetheart, you must never, ever touch things that don't belong to you, especially not money." "But it was messy, Mom," Jasmine replied, her lower lip trembling slightly at her mother's sudden distress. She pointed a pink-gloved finger at her handiwork. The once haphazard piles of cash were now organized into beautiful, geometric blocks. "He'll be happy when he wakes up and sees everything is tidy now. You always say a tidy space makes for a tidy mind." In the corner, hidden in the shadows, Thomas Mitchell was no longer breathing steadily. He was paralyzed. Something deep inside him, a tectonic plate of cynicism that had been grinding away at his soul for years, shifted. His throat constricted, with an emotion he couldn't name. It felt like a thaw, a painful cracking of ice around his heart. This child, this tiny girl who likely understood the value of $1 more keenly than he ever had faced the ultimate temptation, and she hadn't seen it as a temptation at all. She had seen it as a chore, a mess to be tidied, a problem to be solved with a simple, unshakable logic her mother had taught her. Order is better than chaos. More than that, she had immediately and proudly declared her actions to her mother, with the guileless transparency of a soul with absolutely nothing to hide. Her honesty was not a choice, it was an instinct. Thomas felt the sting of tears behind his eyes, an unfamiliar sensation that startled him. He had watched seasoned executives crumble before the allure of power. He had seen families torn apart by inheritance disputes over sums that were pocket change compared to what lay in that safe. Yet here was a 6-year-old girl born into a world that had given her very little, who possessed an integrity so profound, so innate, that it shamed every powerful man he had ever known. He slowly, carefully, let his head loll to the side, deepening the illusion of sleep as Diana gently guided a confused Jasmine away from the vault. He heard Diana's soft, insistent voice explaining why, even with the best intentions, some things were not theirs to fix. He listened as she closed the heavy safe door, the soft click of the mechanism sounding like a final judgment on his cynical experiment. What Thomas didn't know, as he sat there feigning sleep in the echoing silence of his office, was that this was not the end. It was the beginning, The simple, honest gesture of a 6-year-old girl had not just passed his test, it had ignited a fuse. It was about to set in motion a chain of events that would unravel the dark, prejudiced secrets lurking within his own company. It would force him to confront not only the greed of others, but the cost of his own hardened heart, and it would reveal that the greatest fortunes in the world had nothing to do with the paper stacked in a vault, but with the character forged in the hearts of people like Diana and Jasmine Jefferson. The story of his own transformation was just beginning, and he was about to learn that sometimes the most profound lessons in life, business, and humanity are taught by the smallest hands. In the weeks that followed that transformative night, Thomas Mitchell became a ghost in his own empire. The test was over, but his observation had just begun. He found himself inexplicably drawn to the lives of the cleaning lady and her daughter, his new secret obsession. He would stay late, concealed in his office, long after the river of employees had flowed out of the building, just to watch them. He adjusted security camera feeds, focusing on the hallways and offices Diana cleaned, turning his billion-dollar surveillance system into a private window into their humble existence. He learned their rhythm. Diana worked with a relentless, quiet determination, her movements economical and precise. She never lingered, never took unauthorized breaks, never so much as glanced at the personal effects left on desks. She was the model of professional invisibility. Jasmine was her silent partner. The little girl would set up a small portable world for herself in a corner of whichever room her mother was cleaning, a small circle of crayons, a well-loved storybook, a set of flashcards. She would do her homework under the dim glow of emergency exit signs, her brow furrowed with the same concentration she had applied to his messy fortune. What struck Thomas most profoundly was the content of their whispered conversations. He heard Diana patiently explaining a math problem to Jasmine, her voice a low, encouraging murmur. He heard her telling stories of her own childhood, carefully edited to shield Jasmine from the harsh realities of the foster care system that had raised her. But most of all, he heard the lessons. They were simple, powerful maxims, delivered not as lectures, but as gentle truths woven into the fabric of their nightly routine. We always return what isn't ours, Jasmine, even if it's just a penny on the sidewalk. He heard her say one night as she found a coin under a desk and placed it carefully on the blotter. Even if no one is watching. Especially if no one is watching. Our honesty is worth more than any money in the world. It's the one thing we own that no one can ever take from us. It was a sentiment so pure, so antithetical to the world he inhabited, that it felt like a foreign language. In his world, value was quantified, honesty was a commodity, and everything, and everyone, was for sale. Through his discreet inquiries, facilitated by a hefty payment to his head of HR for Diana's sealed file, a fuller picture of her life emerged. It was a portrait of relentless struggle and unyielding dignity. She had lost her parents in a car accident at 9, tumbling into the cold, institutional labyrinth of state care. She aged out of the system at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma she had fought tooth and nail to earn while working nights at a diner. College was an impossible dream, a mountain whose base she could never afford to reach. At 22 she fell in love, became pregnant with Jasmine, and the man who had promised her the world vanished the moment he learned of his impending fatherhood. Since then, Diana's life had been a masterclass in survival. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning his state-of-the-art corporate headquarters at night and a small, private doctor's office in the pre-dawn hours. She supported herself and her daughter entirely on her own, refusing any form of government assistance, which she viewed, with a deep-seated suspicion, as a form of charity that bred dependence. She was fiercely, proudly self-reliant. A strange, protective instinct began to stir in Thomas. It was an unfamiliar feeling, and it made him uncomfortable. He wanted to help, but he knew a direct handout would be an insult to her pride. So he chose a more subtle path. He called Sandra Miller his sharp and perceptive head of human resources, a woman in her 40s who had been with him for over a decade. "Sandra," he began, his tone casual, "I was reviewing our custodial contracts and operational expenses. I think we're undercompensating our night staff, particularly those with long-term, flawless records. Let's create a new tier: senior custodial technician, give it a 25% pay increase, and let's backdate it 3 months. Start with Diana Jefferson." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell," Sandra said, her voice betraying a hint of surprise. "A new category adjustment. I'll process it immediately." Thomas hung up, feeling a flicker of satisfaction. It was a small, anonymous gesture, a secret reward for a secret test. But his quiet act of benevolence did not go unnoticed. And it was noticed by precisely the wrong eyes. Richard Blackwood was the vice president of operations, a man who had been born on third base and was convinced he'd hit a triple at 50. He possessed the unearned confidence and simmering resentment of a man who had inherited everything but achieved nothing. His father was a co-founder of the company, and Richard's position was a legacy, not a meritocracy. He walked the halls with an air of entitled ownership, his gaze perpetually sweeping for subordinates to intimidate and regulations to weaponize. He saw the world as a rigid hierarchy, and he was pathologically obsessed with ensuring everyone knew their place, which was, invariably, beneath him. He discovered the salary adjustment during a routine budget review meeting. His eyes, small and predatory, narrowed on the line item. "Thomas," he said, his voice a rich baritone that dripped with condescension. He made a show of adjusting his gold cufflinks. "A quick query on this line item. A 25% increase for custodial staff, specifically for one employee, Diana Jefferson. Why are we suddenly throwing this kind of money at the cleaning crew?" Thomas met his gaze across the polished boardroom table. The air grew cold. "Diana is an excellent, professional, Richard. We reward excellence in this company, at all levels." Richard let out a short, dismissive laugh. It was a sound that grated on Thomas's nerves like grinding gears. "Excellent. Thomas, please, be realistic. Her job is to empty trash cans and wipe down surfaces. What's next? Performance bonuses for changing a light bulb. You have to understand the natural order of things, where these people belong. Give them an extra coin, and they'll soon be asking for the whole vault. It's in their nature." A hot spike of anger shot through Thomas's chest. These people, the phrase hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He kept his expression a mask of indifference, but inside, a switch had been flipped. He had known Richard was an arrogant fool, a necessary evil tolerated because of his father's significant shareholdings, but he hadn't grasped the true depth of the man's prejudice. Richard, oblivious, pressed on, warming to his theme. "Besides," he added, waving a dismissive hand, "she brings that child with her every night. It's completely inappropriate. This is a billion-dollar enterprise, not a community daycare. What kind of mother exposes her child to a corporate environment at all hours? It speaks to a clear lack of a proper family structure, a certain instability." Thomas's voice was dangerously quiet when he replied, "Her family's structure is none of our concern, Richard. Her work is exemplary. The matter is closed." But for Richard, it was far from closed. He had scented what he perceived as weakness, a breach in the corporate order, and he was a shark that could not ignore the scent of blood in the water. That evening, Thomas witnessed something that turned his simmering anger into a cold, hard rage. He was watching the security feed for the executive floor when he saw Richard, who had deliberately stayed late, intercept Diana in the hallway, was holding her mother's hand, looking up at the tall, imposing man with wide, uncertain eyes. "Listen to me carefully," Richard said, his voice low and threatening. Though the high-fidelity microphones Thomas had installed years ago picked up every venomous syllable, "I know you're getting more money than you deserve. I don't know what kind of special favors you're doing for Mitchell, but I'm telling you now, it's going to stop." Diana visibly recoiled, her face turning pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. She pulled Jasmine closer behind her. "Sir, I don't understand." "Of course you don't understand," Richard sneered, taking a step closer, invading her personal space. "People like you never do. You just take what you're given and keep your mouths shut, and get that child out of here. This is a place of business, not a playground for for street kids." Jasmine, frightened by the man's aggressive tone and the word street kid, which she didn't understand but knew was meant to hurt, hid her face in her mother's coat. Diana's free arm wrapped around her daughter, a protective shield of maternal love. "Sir, I am just doing my job," Diana said, her voice trembling but laced with steel. "Your job," Richard hissed, leaning in conspiratorially, "is to clean and be invisible. Nothing more. Do you understand me?" In Wisibo, from the darkened control room of his penthouse office, Thomas watched the scene unfold on a 50-inch monitor. A purifying anger, hot and clean, surged through him. It was an emotion he hadn't felt in years, an old, forgotten friend. Richard Blackwood had not just crossed a line, he had stomped on it with a patent leather shoe. He had not only insulted a hard-working, dignified woman, but he had deliberately terrified an innocent child whose only crime was existing in his privileged line of sight that night. Alone in the silence of his skyscraper, Thomas Mitchell made a decision. Passive observation was no longer enough. The test was no longer about finding honesty in a world of thieves. It was now about protecting that honesty from the ugliness of men like Richard Blackwood. Richard had revealed his true reptilian nature, and Thomas, for the first time since his partner's betrayal, felt a clear sense of purpose. He had the power, the resources, and now, the motivation to do something about it. What Richard didn't know was that the entire sordid encounter had been recorded in crystal clear high definition. The very security system that Richard himself had championed as a tool to monitor employee productivity had just documented his own poisonous abuse. But Thomas wanted more than just a recording. He wanted to give Richard enough rope, woven from the man's own prejudice and arrogance, to hang himself publicly. He envisioned a fall from grace so spectacular, so humiliating, that Richard Blackwood would become a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms across the country. The plan that began to crystallize in his mind was audacious and complex. It was no longer just about protecting Diana and Jasmine. It was about orchestrating a symphony of justice. Every new insult Richard hurled, every act of contempt, would not be an injury, but a nail in his own coffin. A dormant part of Thomas, the ruthless strategist who had built an empire, awoke with a new, singular focus: the complete and utter annihilation of Richard Blackwood's world. That privileged executive, smug in his inherited power, had no idea what was coming. He had picked a fight with a cleaning lady, but he had started a war with a billionaire. And a billionaire with a righteous cause was the most dangerous adversary a man like him could ever face. The game had changed, and Thomas Mitchell was going to make sure that by the end of it, Richard Blackwood would have lost everything. The first call Thomas made the next morning, before the sun had even crested the city's steel and glass horizon, was to a number stored in his phone under the single name Marcus. "Marcus, I need your services again," Thomas said, his voice devoid of its usual weariness, now clipped and focused. Marcus Chen, a former FBI investigator turned high-priced corporate troubleshooter, answered on the second ring. His voice was a gravelly mix of wry amusement and professional calm. "Thomas, let me guess. Another snake in the C-suite." Marcus was a master of the corporate dark arts. He had been the one to uncover the intricate web of offshore accounts and shell companies that had exposed Thomas's former partner. He knew where the digital skeletons were buried and how to make them dance. "Bigger than a snake," Thomas replied, pacing the length of his office. "A parasite, the kind that thrives on institutional racism and abuse of power. I need a full workup on Richard Blackwood. I want everything. I don't just want evidence of wrongdoing. I want a complete psychological and historical profile of his prejudice." A low chuckle came from the other end of the line. "Blackwood, the Silver Spoon Prince. Thomas, that'll be easier than stealing candy from a baby. Men like him, they're not just arrogant, they're sloppy. They believe their privilege makes them invisible. They always leave a trail. I want this trail to lead directly off a cliff," Thomas said. "Spare no expense." While Marcus began his digital excavation, Richard, puffed up with the success of his perceived intimidation of Diana, escalated his campaign of psychological terror. It was a methodical, cruel assault designed to break her spirit and force her out. On Monday, he marched into Sandra Miller's office in HR, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He held a notepad on which he had scribbled a list of fabricated violations. "Sandra," he announced, not bothering to sit, "we have a problem with the Jefferson woman. She has been arriving late on a regular basis." He tapped the notepad. "I have documented multiple instances. Furthermore, that child she insists on bringing here is causing disturbances. I had a report of her running in the hallways." Sandra, a consummate professional, looked at him over her glasses, her expression unreadable. "Richard, that's surprising. Diana Jefferson's time clock records are immaculate. She has never been late in her 2 years with us." "Records can be altered," Richard interrupted with a wave of his hand, "or the system is faulty. I'm the vice president of operations. My direct observation should be sufficient. We need to start a disciplinary file. 3 strikes, and she's out. That's the policy, is it not?" Sandra felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew something was deeply wrong. This was a vendetta. "I will have to verify these claims, Richard. We need concrete evidence before starting disciplinary action." "Then find it," he snapped, his voice hardening, "or I will start to question your own operational efficiency." The entire exchange was captured by a pinhole camera. Thomas had instructed his security chief to install a smoke detector in Sandra's office that very morning, under the pretext of a system-wide security upgrade. He watched the recording later, a cold satisfaction mixing with his disgust. Richard wasn't just a bully, he was a clumsy one. He was creating a paper trail of his own malicious intent. On Wednesday, Richard crossed an even more dangerous line, moving from professional harassment to personal, insidious insinuation. He waited for Diana in the cavernous, empty parking garage as she and Jasmine arrived for their shift. The air was cold, the only sounds the hum of the ventilation and their lonely footsteps. He stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking their path to the elevator. Jasmine flinched, instinctively grabbing her mother's leg. "Evening, Diana," he said, his voice oozing a false sincerity that was more menacing than his open anger. "Listen carefully. That salary bump you received, it's raised some eyebrows. A woman like you, a single mother, people are starting to talk. They're wondering what kind of special services you're providing to get that kind of attention from the top." Diana's spine stiffened. She trembled, not with fear, but with a profound, righteous anger. Her voice was a low, dangerous whisper. "What you are implying, Mr. Blackwood, is disgusting and untrue, am I?" he said, taking another step closer. "I'm just a realist. I'm implying that people like you always have a price. I'm just curious to know what yours is." From behind her mother's legs, Jasmine's small voice piped up, laced with fear and confusion. "Mommy, why is that man being so mean to you?" Diana didn't look at Richard. She looked down at her daughter, her expression softening into one of fierce, protective love. "It's okay, my love," she said, her voice clear and steady, a stark contrast to Richard's venom. "Some grown-ups are very unhappy inside, and they try to make other people feel unhappy too. We just feel sorry for them." Richard let out a cruel, barking laugh. "Unhappy? Lady, I have more money in this wallet than you two will see in your entire lives. I'm not the unhappy one here. But I am getting very, very concerned about what people like you might do when you get too comfortable in a place you don't belong." Finally stepped aside, a triumphant sneer on his face, and watched them walk to the elevator. That night, Thomas replayed the parking garage footage no less than 10 times. With each viewing, his resolve hardened into something akin to granite. This was no longer just about justice for Diana. It was about eradicating a cancer from his company. Marcus arrived the next morning, his usual wry demeanor replaced by a grim professionalism. He placed a thick dossier on Thomas's desk. "You were right," Marcus began, pulling out a sheaf of papers. "He's not just a casual bigot, he's a professional parasite, and he has a 15-year history. Look at this." He spread out the documents. There were copies of 3 separate labor lawsuits from Richard's previous positions at other companies, all filed by minority employees, all quietly settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. "Always the same pattern," Marcus explained. "He targets a black or Latino employee, usually someone in a vulnerable position, then begins a campaign of systematic humiliation, gaslighting, and fabricated write-ups until the person quits or is fired. His father's lawyers then swoop in, pay for their silence, and dear old dad gets his boy a new VP position at another company where he can start the cycle all over again." Thomas flipped through the pages, his anger a cold, steady burn. Richard wasn't just prejudiced. He was a serial predator who derived pleasure from the torture of those he deemed beneath him. "It gets worse," Marcus said, opening his laptop. "Guys like this can't help themselves. They need an audience. I cracked the security on a few of his private social media accounts and gained access to some closed group message boards he frequents. These aren't just off-color jokes, Thomas. These are full-blown supremacist manifestos." He turned the laptop around. Thomas stared at the screen, reading screenshots of Richard's own words, posts about the genetic inferiority of certain races, vile memes depicting black people in stereotypical, cartoonish ways, conversations with other privileged executives where they joked about keeping the monkeys in their place. In one chilling exchange, Richard wrote, "The only way to deal with these people is to show them who's boss from the very start, crush their spirit, and you crush their ambition. It's a service to the natural order." "This is," Thomas began, searching for a word. Gold Marcus finished for him. "Forensic, undeniable proof of premeditated, systematic, discriminatory behavior." That afternoon, Sandra Miller requested a discreet, urgent meeting. She entered Thomas's office and closed the door, her face etched with worry. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice low, "I have to talk to you about Richard Blackwood. He is exerting extreme pressure on me to fire Diana Jefferson. I've told him I have no legal grounds, but he's insistent. He's starting to create a very hostile environment." Thomas feigned a professional concern. "What kind of pressure?" "Sandra, he's making veiled threats about my own job security. He claims she's violating company regulations, but whenever I ask for specifics, he's evasive. Yesterday, he sent me a formal memo suggesting that, for security reasons, certain employees, and he made it very clear who he meant, should not have access to administrative areas after business hours. He's trying to build a case out of thin air. Certain employees, Thomas repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Sandra hesitated, then took a deep breath. Sir, I'm not supposed to make these judgments, but I believe his conduct is driven by discriminatory animus. It's personal, and I think it's based on her race. It was the opening Thomas had been waiting for. He leaned forward, his expression now deadly serious. Sandra, if you suspect discrimination, you have a legal and ethical obligation to document it. I want you to open a formal internal investigation into Richard's conduct. Document every conversation, every memo, every threat. I am the president of this company, and I am officially sanctioning this investigation. You have my full protection. Sandra's eyes widened, a wave of relief washing over her face. Thank you, sir. I will. That night, Thomas implemented the next phase of his plan. He had the IT department install additional state-of-the-art microphones in Richard's office and the surrounding areas. The official justification was an upgrade to the building's emergency communication system. In reality, it was a digital trap, baited and set. He didn't have to wait long. On Friday evening, Richard, believing he was alone in his office after everyone had left for the weekend, made a phone call. Thomas, listening live from his own office, heard every word with pristine clarity. Dad, Richard began, his voice whiny and conspiratorial. It's me. That situation we discussed. Yes, the black cleaning lady. It's becoming a problem. She's more resilient than I thought, and Mitchell is being inexplicably protective. I need you to use your contacts. Create some legal difficulties for her, an anonymous tip about her immigration status, a flag on her social security number, a suspicion of theft from a previous job. Anything. Something that will force her to resign and disappear. His father's voice, tinny and impatient, echoed through the speaker. Richard, for God's sake, are you sure you're not overreacting? This is a mere cleaning lady. Dad, it's a matter of principle, Richard insisted, his voice rising. If we allow these people to feel too comfortable, to think they can get special treatment, soon they'll all be demanding rights and privileges they haven't earned. It's a cancer. We need to cut it out now, before other employees, similar ones, start getting ideas. Thomas recorded every word, a grim smile touching his lips. It was a confession. Conspiracy to fabricate evidence, explicit racial discrimination, and a clear admission of motive. It was the smoking gun. Marcus arrived at Thomas's office first thing Monday morning, looking like a man who had just hit the lottery. Thomas, he said, barely able to contain his excitement as he placed a new file on the desk. You are not going to believe this. I was running a deep trace on his financials, looking for payoffs or other dirt, and I found something better. He's planning something big against Diana. For this week. Thomas leaned forward, his full attention captured. What is it? I intercepted encrypted messages between him and a shady personal security guy he keeps on retainer. He's organizing a staged theft. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. What do you mean? He's going to plant a valuable item, something personal and expensive, in her cleaning supplies. Marcus explained, his voice grim. Then he's going to discover it publicly. He'll call the police, make a huge scene, humiliate her in front of everyone, and have her arrested. He's not just trying to get her fired anymore, Thomas. He's trying to destroy her life. At that moment, Thomas realized the full, horrifying scope of Richard's malice. The man was a monster, cloaked in a designer suit. He thought he was playing a petty game of corporate chess against a defenseless pawn and a distracted king. He had no idea that he was walking, step by deliberate step, into an inescapable checkmate that had been years in the making, not by Thomas, but by his own hateful legacy. Thomas looked at Marcus, his eyes like chips of ice. A slow, cold smile spread across his face, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Perfect, he said softly. Let him walk right into it. The further he goes, the harder he will fall. Richard Blackwood was about to learn a very painful lesson. He believed he was the predator, the one setting the trap. He was oblivious to the fact that he was the prey, and the cage, meticulously constructed from his own words, his own bigotry, and his own actions, was about to snap shut, and Thomas Mitchell would be there to turn the key. The air on Tuesday evening crackled with an unspoken tension. A silence stretched taut over the 78th floor. Richard Blackwood, executing his sordid little masterpiece, moved with the arrogant confidence of a man who had never faced a single meaningful consequence in his entire life. At exactly 8 p.m., just as Diana and Jasmine's small car was pulling into the vast, echoing parking garage, he made his move. He slipped out of his office, clutching a heavy gold Rolex watch, a gaudy symbol of a life he hadn't earned. The watch was real, purchased with cash that morning from a jeweler downtown for a staggering $15,000, an expensive prop for his theater of cruelty. He moved swiftly to the janitorial closet on the floor, his heart thumping with a venomous excitement. He located Diana's cleaning cart, prepped and ready for her shift. With a gloved hand, he delved into the neatly organized collection of spray bottles and microfiber cloths and carefully buried the Rolex deep inside a box of disposable latex gloves. Perfect, he muttered to himself, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. He then retreated to his office to watch the security monitors, a predator observing his pre-baited trap. I'll give her 15 minutes, he thought. Let her start her routine. Then I'll go down and catch her red-handed, the little thief. What Richard didn't know was that he was not the only one watching. 2 floors above, in the darkened penthouse suite, Thomas Mitchell sat before a bank of high-resolution monitors that displayed a dozen different camera angles. The scene in the janitorial closet was captured not just by the standard hallway camera, but by 3 additional microcameras Marcus had installed over the weekend, one in the ceiling sprinkler head, one in the light fixture, and one embedded in the doorframe, capturing Richard's smug face in perfect, incriminating clarity. Marcus, he's in. The package is delivered. Thomas spoke into a small, discreet radio. He planted the watch. Activate all supplemental recordings. Confirmed, Thomas. Marcus's voice crackled back in his earpiece. All systems are green. We have audio and video from angles he doesn't even know exist. Our guests are also in position. Marcus himself was strategically parked in a black surveillance van across the street, a mobile command center filled with recording equipment, and waiting discreetly in the building's lobby, posing as clients for a late meeting, were 3 other people. Jennifer Walsh, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist from Channel 7 News, known for her exposures on corporate corruption; Michael Torres, a reporter from the city's largest newspaper; and David Chen, a renowned civil rights attorney Thomas had placed on a multi-million-dollar retainer that morning. The trap was not just for Richard, it was for the world to see. 8:20 p.m., Richard made his grand entrance. He descended to the 78th floor, where Diana was quietly cleaning one of the large open-plan office spaces. Jasmine was sitting at a nearby empty desk, diligently practicing her letters in a notebook, her small world illuminated by the desk's task light. Richard had brought 2 of the company's burlest security guards with him, instructing them that he was conducting a surprise asset protection inspection. Mrs. Jefferson, Richard said, his voice dripping with a false syrupy courtesy that was more chilling than his overt anger. Diana stopped wiping down a workstation, turning to face him with a confused but polite expression. Mr. Blackwood, she acknowledged. Jasmine looked up, her eyes immediately wary at the sight of the mean man. A moment of your time, Richard continued, gesturing grandly. We've had some concerning reports of personal items going missing from desks on this floor. Standard procedure requires me to conduct a quick inspection of your cleaning supplies. Diana's brow furrowed. Missing items, Mr. Blackwood, I assure you, procedure. Mrs. Jefferson, just procedure, he lied smoothly, walking with theatrical purpose directly to the cleaning cart. He made a show of rummaging through the top shelf before his hand dove into the box of gloves. His eyes widened in mock surprise. Ah, he said, his voice ringing with faux discovery. How very, very interesting. What, I wonder, is this? He pulled out the gold Rolex, holding it up between his thumb and forefinger so it glittered under the fluorescent lights. He dangled it in front of her face, the very picture of a betrayed executive. Diana Jefferson, he said, his voice now cold and hard as steel. This is a $15,000 Rolex watch. It went missing from Mr. Mitchell's office just yesterday. The color drained from Diana's face. She looked at the watch as if it were a venomous snake. I have never seen that watch in my entire life, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Of course you haven't, Richard sneered, the poisonous sarcasm now on full display for the guards. It just magically appeared in your cart, did it? A gift from the cleaning fairy. Jasmine, sensing her mother's profound distress, pushed her chair back and stood up, her small hands balled into fists. Mommy, she cried, her voice trembling. What's happening? Tell him you didn't do it. Be quiet, child, Richard ordered, brutally, not even bothering to look at her. Your mother will have to come with us. She has a lot of explaining to do. He nodded to one of the security guards. Call the police. Now, I want her arrested for felony theft. The guard, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable, pulled out his phone and began to dial, exactly as Richard had instructed. It was the climax of Richard's plan, the moment of absolute victory, that it was at that exact moment that the office door swung open and Thomas Mitchell walked in. He was not alone. Flanking him were Marcus Chen and the 3 clients from the lobby. Richard, Thomas said, his voice a blade of ice that cut through the charged atmosphere. I think you should hang up that phone. Richard's head snapped up, a flicker of confusion crossing his face before it was replaced by a triumphant grin. Thomas, perfect timing. I'm glad you're here. We've caught your favorite employee red-handed. She was stealing your watch. Thomas actually laughed. It was not a sound of mirth. It was a cold, dead sound that echoed in the silent office and made the hairs on the back of Richard's neck stand up. My watch, Richard. That's fascinating. Especially since I've been wearing an Apple Watch for the last 5 years. I have never owned a Rolex in my life. The triumphant confidence on Richard's face began to visibly crumble. It slid off his features like a poorly fitted mask. What are you saying? I'm saying, Thomas continued, taking a slow step forward, that we have just recorded you on multiple high-definition cameras. Planting a watch that you purchased this morning. We have the receipt and the store's security footage. By the way, in Diana's cart in a pathetic, criminal attempt to frame her for a crime you invented. Marcus stepped forward, holding a tablet. He angled the screen so Richard and the 2 stunned security guards could see it clearly. Angle 1, Marcus said calmly, playing the crystal-clear footage from the hallway camera showing Richard entering the janitorial closet. He swiped to the next video, Angle 2, from the light fixture. A lovely top-down view. He swiped again. And my personal favorite, Angle 3, from the doorframe. We even have a beautiful close-up of your face when you check to make sure no one is watching. Richard stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. He was speechless. Oh, but Richard, Thomas said, his voice a low, menacing purr, there is so much more. Marcus, why don't you show him the little scrapbook we've put together for him? Marcus tapped the tablet again, and a digital file opened. He turned the screen towards Richard, its light illuminating the man's growing horror. The first images to appear were screenshots. Screenshots of Richard's racist posts in his private online groups. Need to keep these monkeys in their place. Marcus read aloud, his voice flat and professional. That's you, isn't it, Richard? And here's another gem about the natural order. Powerful stuff. Diana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she finally understood the depth of the malice that had been directed at her. Richard tried to lunge for the tablet, a desperate, cornered animal, but Thomas blocked his path with an almost casual ease. Where did you get this? Richard stammered, sweat beading on his forehead and trickling down his temples. The security system, Richard. The one you yourself approved, Thomas answered. You were so worried about employees wasting time, you forgot it records everything, including your phone calls. For example, the call to your father, asking him to conspire with you to fabricate evidence against an innocent employee. We have that in pristine audio. A lovely father-son moment. It was then that Jennifer Walsh, the journalist, stepped forward, her professional demeanor sharp and focused. Jennifer Walsh, Channel 7 News, she said, her voice clear and carrying. Mr. Blackwood, would you care to comment on this extensive evidence of systematic racial discrimination, harassment, and conspiracy to fabricate a criminal charge? The blood drained from Richard's face. He finally, belatedly, understood the sheer scale of the trap he had blundered into. This wasn't an internal matter. This was a public execution. You can't, you can't use that, he sputtered. That's private. I have rights. Of course you do, Richard, Thomas said calmly. You have the right to remain silent, because anything you say can and will be used against you, not just by the police, who, by the way, are on their way to arrest you for conspiracy, filing a false police report, and attempted defamation, but by the press, by this company's board of directors, and by Diana's new legal counsel. He gestured to David Chen, who gave Richard a thin, predatory smile. Marcus continued the grim presentation on the tablet. We also have the records of your 15-year history of discriminatory practices at your previous jobs. The 3 lawsuits. Your daddy hushed up sworn affidavits from 8 other Black and Latino employees you harassed until they quit. It's a very compelling pattern, and the best part, Thomas interjected, savoring the moment, is the footage from the cameras you didn't know existed. The ones that recorded your threats to Diana in the parking garage. The ones that recorded your disgusting, sexually charged ones that recorded you bullying Sandra Miller in HR. The second reporter stepped forward, his own camera now discreetly filming. Mr. Blackwood, how do you respond to the accusations that you have used your position of power to systematically persecute minority employees for over a decade? Richard made a break for it, a panicked, desperate dash for the door, but Marcus, who had moved with the silent speed of a former federal agent, blocked the exit. Oh, I almost forgot, Marcus said with a cheerful smile. As of an hour ago, a court order has frozen all of your personal and family bank accounts pending multiple civil lawsuits. Your father and the rest of your family have already been sent a copy of the evidence dossier. The company board called an emergency telemeeting 40 minutes ago to vote on your immediate termination for cause. It was unanimous. Diana, who had remained in a state of stunned silence throughout the entire devastating revelation, finally found her voice. She looked at Thomas, her eyes wide with a dawning understanding. Mr. Mitchell, you knew this was going to happen. Thomas turned to her, his expression softening for the first time. Diana, I knew Richard was a prejudiced man. I did not imagine the depths he would sink to in order to destroy you. When I discovered his plan to frame you, I decided it was time to stop watching passively and start acting. Jasmine, who had been watching the entire drama unfold with a child's confused gravity, timidly approached Thomas. Mr. Thomas, she whispered, is the mean man going to stop scaring Mummy now? Thomas knelt, bringing himself down to her eye level. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Yes, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. He's going away. He will never ever bother you or your mummy again. Desperate and ruined, Richard made one last, pathetic plea. Thomas, please, he begged, his voice cracking. We can sort this out. Between gentlemen, my family, ... We have significant investments in this company. Had Thomas corrected him, the word falling like a guillotine's blade. You had significant investments. The board also voted, as per the company's morality clause, to force the sale of all Blackwood family shares at a preset, discounted price. The buyout was completed 20 minutes ago. Congratulations, Richard. In a single evening, you've managed to not only destroy your own career but obliterate your family's multi-generational fortune as well. The wail of approaching sirens grew louder. The police had arrived, but it was not Diana Jefferson they were here for. Two uniformed officers entered, led by a stern-faced detective. Richard Blackwood, the detective announced, his voice booming. In the office, you are under arrest for conspiracy to fabricate evidence, criminal harassment, and filing a false report. As the officers snapped handcuffs onto Richard's wrists, he shot a look of pure, unadulterated hatred at Diana. This won't stand, he spat. You'll see. My family has influence. You will pay for this. Had influence. Marcus corrected him again, cheerfully. Until the full evidence package was leaked to every major national media outlet this morning. Your father called 2 hours ago, asking for his contact information to be removed from the company directory. He's disowned you, Richard. The third reporter, Michael Torres, approached Diana, a microphone extended. Ms. Jefferson, a final question. How does it feel, knowing that you have been so completely and publicly vindicated, and that the man who tormented you will now face the full consequences of his actions? Diana looked from the cuffed and defeated form of Richard Blackwood to her daughter, Jasmine, who was now safely tucked under her arm. Then she looked at Thomas, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I feel ... gratitude, she said, her voice shaking but strong. Gratitude that there are still good people in the world, people willing to fight for justice, even when it would be so much easier to look away. Thomas watched as Richard was led away, a pathetic, sobbing mess, his designer suit now looking like a cheap costume. He knew the man faced not just prison, but a life of complete social and financial ruin. His name was destroyed. His family had abandoned him. His career had ended in a blaze of public humiliation, so spectacular it would be talked about for years. Diana, Thomas said, turning to her as the reporters and police began to disperse. I believe we need to discuss a promotion and a new job title. As Diana finally let her tears of relief fall, pulling Jasmine into a tight hug, and as the little girl, not quite understanding everything but knowing the danger had passed, began to clap her small hands, it was clear that justice had not just been served, it had been delivered with the devastating, undeniable force of an avalanche. Richard Blackwood's greatest mistake was not his prejudice or his arrogance. It was underestimating the power of a quiet woman's dignity, a little girl's honesty, and a billionaire's newfound conscience. 6 months later, the halls of Mitchell Enterprises were a different world. Diana Jefferson no longer walked him with a cleaning cart, but with a leather briefcase and an air of quiet authority. After the events of that night, Thomas had discovered a detail from her file that stunned him. She had completed 3 years of a business administration degree, with honors before dropping out when she became pregnant with Jasmine. He didn't just offer her a promotion, he offered her a future. He paid for her to complete her degree through an accelerated executive program and created a new position for her, Director of Employee Relations and Corporate Ethics. Her first official act was to design and implement the Jasmine Jefferson Fair Chance Scholarship Program, a fully funded initiative to provide college tuition for the children of the company's hourly wage employees. The program's first official beneficiary was, of course, Jasmine. "Mummy, can I go show Mr. Thomas my drawing?" Jasmine asked, now a confident 7-year-old, as she ran through the executive suite that had become her second home. She was thriving. At the city's best private school, her tuition anonymously paid by Thomas, she no longer spoke of coloring books. She spoke of wanting to become a lawyer to help good people, like Mr. Thomas helped us. Thomas smiled from behind his desk, watching the scene. The transformation in their lives was a source of constant, quiet joy for him. His own life had been transformed as well. Shaken from his cynical stupor, he had poured his energy and resources into remaking his company. Mitchell Enterprises had won national awards for its diversity and inclusion initiatives. The company became a benchmark for hiring and promoting minority executives. And the Fair Chance program, which Thomas had endowed with $50 million, had already helped over 200 families break generational cycles of poverty. Meanwhile, Richard Blackwood was living a very different reality. He served 18 months in a medium-security prison for conspiracy and racial discrimination, a lenient sentence. His lawyer had argued, though the public disgrace was a life sentence in itself. Upon his release, he found a world that had utterly and completely rejected him. His name was toxic. No reputable company would touch him. His wife had divorced him during the trial, taking what little remained of his non-frozen assets. His children, now in college, had legally changed their last name and refused all contact. The man who once commanded a corporate division now worked as a struggling used car salesman at a dusty lot on the edge of town, earning less in a year than Diana now made in 3 months. The internet, cruel and eternal, ensured his infamy. A simple Google search of his name brought up dozens of articles, news clips of his arrest, and screenshots of his racist screeds haunting him like digital ghosts. 3 years later, on Jasmine's 10th birthday, Thomas hosted a party in the sprawling backyard of the new house he had bought for them in a quiet, leafy suburb. Surrounded by Jasmine's new school friends and Diana's colleagues, Thomas tapped a glass for a toast. To Jasmine and to her mother, Diana, he began, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "You two have changed my life in ways I can never fully repay. You taught me that integrity is not a weakness, but the ultimate strength. That is why, in honor of this day, I am officially launching the Jasmine Jefferson Educational Fund, an independent foundation with an initial endowment of $500 million. For the next century, it will provide college scholarships and mentorship to thousands of talented, underprivileged young black men and women across the country." Jasmine, her eyes wide with disbelief, ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. "Thank you, Mr. Dad," she whispered, a nickname she had recently adopted for him. "Thank you for believing in us." That very same day, Richard Blackwood was fired from his job at the car lot. A customer had recognized him and complained to the manager, who had promptly Googled his name. His fall had been so absolute, so public, that it was now a required case study in ethics courses at major business schools. A perfect example of how prejudice and arrogance could not only destroy a career, but vaporize a legacy. Thomas looked out at the joyful scene in the garden and realized a profound truth of his journey. True revenge, true justice, was never about the destruction of Richard Blackwood. It was about the construction of something better in his place. It was about turning a cynical, soulless corporation into a force for good. It was about creating opportunities where none existed. It was about proving that integrity, when backed by power and resources, could change the world. The simple honesty of a 6-year-old girl in front of an open safe taught me that the only effective response to hatred is not more hatred, but overwhelming, relentless, and strategic acts of love and opportunity, Thomas said years later, during a commencement speech at Harvard University, with a proud Diana and a college-aged Jasmine sitting in the front row. "The man who tried to tear us down, who tried to put us in what he believed was our proper place, only ended up lifting us to heights we never dreamed we could reach." Today, Jasmine is a top student at Harvard Law, an outspoken advocate for social justice. Diana, with an MBA and a seat on the board of Mitchell Enterprises, is a nationally recognized leader in corporate reform, and Thomas, no longer a recluse in his glass tower, is a celebrated philanthropist, having dedicated the rest of his life and the bulk of his fortune to the foundation that bears Jasmine's name. And Richard, he lives alone in a small, rundown apartment, working odd jobs under an assumed name, forever remembered not for his wealth or his power, but as a footnote in a story about a little girl who, instead of taking the money, simply decided to tidy it up. True justice, Thomas had learned, was not about punishment. It was about proving, beyond all doubt, that goodness, kindness, and decency, when properly defended, will always, always win.